It is Friday, July 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a very interesting week that played out here where not a lot happened, but certain topics naturally commanded a lot more of the conversation versus others, and so that's what we're going to be getting into later. But first, as always, our PS Plus reminder. So those July PS Plus Essential games are still live. Go ahead and grab them. But more importantly, we finally got our first update for PS Plus Extra and Premium, where we know what those games are going to be. So this was announced on Wednesday, the second Wednesday of this month, for what is July 19th, the third Tuesday of this month. Just for future reference, that's how they're likely going to do it when it comes to mid-month refreshes for Extra and Premium, which they told us, but that's how they're going to be doing it. As for the games themselves, I would say this is a good refresh for PS Plus Extra because it's like 15, 17 something games, which is way more than what we saw with what was formerly PS Now. On a good month of PS Now, we got 5 to 6 games, but typically PS Now was, 3? You know what I mean? So this is a lot better. Of course, we knew about Stray, so that's PS4, PS5, day and date, by the way, as well. So I may be a little bit biased here, but you should play that game. Also, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, Marvel's Avengers, and a few Assassin's Creed titles, Unity 4, Black Flag, Rogue Remastered, Freedom Cry. Of course, we're going to be getting a lot more Ubisoft titles as well due to that agreement that Sony has with Ubisoft. So by the end of this year, we should have about 50 games in that Ubisoft catalog. So with these titles, they should be around 30, so we should be expecting about 20 more. There's also Saints Row, Ice Age, Jumanji, Paw Patrol on PS4, that's pretty hype. And when it comes to PS Plus Premium, this is where it's not so good. Only 2 titles, 2 PSP games. We've got Loco Roco Midnight Carnival, but also No Heroes Allowed, which that is such a quirky, unique, and interesting game that I kind of consider it as a hidden gem on PSP, which for that franchise, it's by Japan Studio. And Japan Studio has more well-known games than that, so I feel like not many people have played these games. The most recent one was on PSVR, and that was like 4 or 5 years ago, but that was also PSVR, so a lot of people did not have that either. And then the entries on PSP, the first 2 have a really long-winded, wacky name, and then it moved on to No Heroes Allowed, and then I think there was another one, but the gameplay is very unique, there's a lot of humor, and it's just a really cool game that is now going to be playable on PS4 and PS5 via emulation. So I saw this and I was like, No Heroes Allowed, I never would have expected that. That is so cool. So I would advocate for more of this long term when it comes to PS Plus Premium and that classics catalog. I mean, obviously people want, the well-known classics, games they grew up with, and even something like cult classics, even those tend to have, a decent amount of notoriety. I would love, all that alongside, weird stuff like No Heroes Allowed being brought forward. So that is really cool. But this is a good segue to our next news story, which is the PlayStation blog in Italy made a mistake on their post for the PS Plus refresh, where for their classic games, they had a few more titles listed, which was Ridge Racer 2, and we know that game's coming. Also Dino Crisis, which we just saw promotional material for that game, so we know that's coming soon. And then Soul Calibur Broken Destiny on PSP. That one is also, that one appears to be new, but the blog post had to be edited to remove these games, so it seems like they put that up too early because they likely are coming, just not this month, maybe next month, which would also give us a good indicator of how often we're going to get premium games or classic games on premium, which would be 2 for the first month and maybe 3 for the next, and that's not really an ideal output. Classic games do have a license problem. There's certain things that we're definitely just not going to get right, but I would like at least 5 to 6 per month. So right now it seems like the output is about what I was expecting, or at least what my impressions were when the service relaunched across all territories, where Extra has a very good game catalog, a lot of value. There's a little something there for everybody. And then Premium needs some work, and that's reflected in the first refresh, where a lot of extra catalog games, and then Premium, not so much. And if we're only looking at 2 to 3 games, per month for the classics. We're not going to get a whole lot after 3, 4, 5 years. So hopefully they do turn that up a bit more. Moving on to our next news story, Sony has officially licensed a third-party M.2 SSD for PS5, and that would be the Western Digital SN850, which is a very good drive. I use one. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. Mark Cerny, the PS5 system architect, also has one, and yeah, it works quite well. And so this doesn't mean too much outside the fact that this drive has now met any sort of long-term testing requirements at Sony internally. So it has the seal of approval. That's good. And now that means you can find this drive on sale not only from Western Digital, but also I would assume eventually on PlayStation Direct and also at retail in the very familiar white and blue PlayStation 5 branded packaging. But I will caution, you might want to avoid that if you can, right? So I know it's helpful if you are nervous about what drive to buy and if you want a heat sink or rather you need one, right? So it's kind of an easy set it and forget it kind of thing, but we saw this a lot with PS4 and X1 when it came to branded third-party drives. It might have a cool logo or something, or it might have a game tie-in, but they were always a little bit more pricey for no reason. Don't forget the huge benefit to PS5 is accepting any M.2 compatible drive. So from any manufacturer, as long as it works, and that's the huge benefit in terms of pricing. So for perspective's sake, I bought my SN850 for $250 2 years ago, 1 terabyte, no heatsink, and now you can buy that same drive or a comparable one for $150 to $180, and now the 2 terabyte is around the price range I paid 2 years ago, right? So price per gigabyte always comes down, and that is the huge benefit to third-party drives on PS5. Definitely take advantage of it. Next up, God of War Ragnarok. The pre-orders go live today, and I am not sure just how useful this warning is really going to be, because I would imagine by the time I upload this, the Collector's and Jotnar edition might be completely sold out, but if they're not, I would say you might want to grab one if they're not already, because there's likely going to be a lot more attention and interest in this game versus, say, Horizon, where that game had 2 Collector's editions, big box ones, and even after launch, they were available, and they even went on sale, but I would not expect that for God of War. We might have another Fireflies edition situation on our hands where it sells out, and also it's being flipped on eBay for 2-3 times its price, which for this we're looking at $200 to $260 for the Collector's and Jotnar edition, which is really steep, but that's kind of what happens with some of these big box collector's editions. That's why I even stopped buying these a long time ago. It's so much and they take up so much room. But I digress. The real news story here, though, is the confirmation of some very expected but nice to hear PS5 features for the PS5 version. So some store listings had some bullet points, which, it's typical stuff. DualSense features, so haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, 3D audio. You've got the fast loading via the SSD, but also performance mode settings. So there's only 2, the expected 4K 30, a full 4K 30, or a dynamic 4K targeting 60 frames per second, which is still good, obviously. But nowadays, when it comes to Sony first party, there is certainly the hope and expectation of a 40 FPS VRR mode, which is, as I say, like a perfect balance, and it's really awesome to play games like that. But also possibly an unlocked frame rate VRR mode where your TV can come in and clean up, or at least prevent, massive screen tearing, and that's also a really cool way to play games. For God of War, at least, we do have to remember the game was in development for a while already, and recently we're hearing that the game had to slip by a few months, and it's getting very close to not hitting this year. So it seems like when it comes to performance mode settings, that might have been low on the priority list. So not available at launch, but that's not to say that we might see it 3, 4, 5 months down the road when they eventually work on patches for this game, which I'm sure there's going to be a good amount of post-launch support for possibly adding those features eventually. Now, I know some are expecting me to talk about this, so we'll mention it briefly here, but yes, the pre-orders are also up for Stray, the 2022 Game of the Year. Watch out, God of War. This game, the pre-orders are up for the IM 8-bit edition, which you don't have to get. This is more of a collector's edition, more or less, at $45, which includes a matte black hollow sleeve, and also some like art cards and a poster, and also a weird patch that is supposed to replicate the patch or a patch of fur from the cat in the game, which is kind of weird, but also super dope. You don't have to get that. There is a retail version, which will be for like $30, I think, and that's going to be widely available, I assume. But there's that, alongside a very interesting collaboration. So a Stray designed or a Stray themed cat backpack, and also a harness, which my cat would not enjoy either of these. So I appreciate these suggestions, but Melissa would not do well in either of these. So I'm going to leave these up to other folks to pre-order and try out, but that was also really cool to see. Anyway, moving on to our next story. Sony has recently announced a brand new rewards program called PlayStation Stars, and this is more or less like any other rewards program you may have heard of before, so like Nintendo or also Microsoft Rewards, and this is very similar. So there's going to be a monthly check-in campaign for simply playing any game for a reward, and there's also things like winning tournaments or earning certain trophies, or also being the first person to earn a platinum in your local time zone for a well-known recently released game. Also, all members will earn loyalty points that can be redeemed later in a catalog that could include PSN wallet funds or also select PlayStation Store products. PS Plus members enrolled into PlayStation Stars will automatically earn points for any purchase on the PlayStation Store as well. And in addition to this, there's also a new reward type called Digital Collectibles, which will be little trinkets representing iconic characters or legacy devices, which in a conversation with the Washington Post, SIE's Grace Chen says, and I quote here, "It's definitely not NFTs, definitely not, you can't trade them or sell them, it is not leveraging any blockchain technologies, and definitely not NFTs." So that was put to bed right away, but basically this new initiative will launch later this year. So cool. I mean, there's really no other thing to really say here. It's like any other rewards program, so it's better to have it than have nothing at all. You might as well, bank some sort of reward for your activity and your engagement and your spending on PlayStation. It just, I guess it really depends on how lenient, or rather how strict they want to be when it comes to point accumulation, if there's any caps, and how often you can redeem. That's usually what makes or breaks a good rewards program, but still nice to see. If you remember, a long time ago, Sony had a rewards program for earning trophies, and they had other things you could do, but like earning trophies was the cool thing, and so you could earn silvers, golds, and platinums, and I think 10 platinums, if I remember correctly, it was so long ago, 10 platinums earned you a $10 PSN, gift, PSN gift card, which, it's not like you would use it purposely to make money that way, but it's a very nice little cool end reward you would get for just playing a bunch of video games. So all around, I think it's sweet, and also it is, encouraging to see Sony have some sort of acknowledgement or stance on NFTs, and for the time being, it's a very swift, no, definitely not. They're not collectible, you can't trade them, not blockchain, definitely not. It's weird that they have to go about it that way, but at least we have that stance. Next up, The Last of Us Part 1 has recently gone gold as confirmed by Naughty Dog on Twitter, so the game is done. It should be releasing on time in September, no problem, and that's really good to see. But also, we had more stories surrounding this game, like, for example, one developer who worked on the game mentioned that they had a very good experience with, they didn't have any crunch on the game, more or less, right? So the principal environment artist at Naughty Dog, Anthony Vaccaro, mentioned this on his personal Twitter, where he says, and I quote here, "This is the first time in my 13-year career across multiple studios that I didn't need a crunch to finish a game. Feels good, really good, especially hitting the same quality bar as The Last of Us 2. More work to keep doing, but proud of the big changes so far to make the studio healthier." Now that is really great to hear, especially when it's Naughty Dog, where they have a reputation of having a stressful work culture, work environment, a lot of crunch, but we also have to remember that problem has plagued, most of this industry across various studios, or dare I say all studios, across various disciplines, even publishers, QA, just everything that you can think of. They all get hit pretty hard on big projects, even smaller projects, trying to get them out the door. It's always been a big problem in this industry. So it doesn't really matter what the project is, even in the context of a remake where, yes, there's not going to be nearly as much to do versus an original title from the ground up. It's still always enlightening and good to hear that the work culture and work balance is starting to favor the employees' well-being versus just getting the project out the door, right? And we also have to remember that there's certain disciplines in the games business that, regardless of an original title or remake, they still have a lot on their plate. Anthony is a principal environment artist. There's many aspects of this game that are being completely redone from the ground up, and that's going to be a iterative process, so they might have just as much of a workload versus an original project, and that's not going to be true for every single discipline on this game, but we always have to remember that and not just look at the project holistically and think, yeah, of course, it's a remake, there's not much to do. That's not always true for every single aspect of the game, but, at the very least, it's so great to see that they might be going into a better direction moving forward. Now, another tweet that came up recently, and this is the one that caused a lot of conversation throughout this week, and really it's what we've been hearing since this game was announced, was the price tag surrounding The Last of Us Part 1. And so Robert Morrison, an animator at Ben Studio, recently at Ben Studio, he was previously, he just left Sony's Visual Arts Service Group working on this game, but he said on Twitter, and I quote here, "It's just a cash grab. Actually, it's the most meticulously built and crafted project that I've ever seen or been a part of in my entire career. The highest level of care and attention to detail possible." He then follows that up by saying, "The price of the game is out of my control and worth is subjective to each individual. You can decide for yourself if you want it or not. All I'm saying is I am in awe of the work that an amazing group of people did on the project. A tremendous amount of passion was put into it." And those are the tweets that reignited the conversation surrounding this game, which it's been that way since the game was announced, and now it's, it didn't help that more news stories came up about this these tweets, and so a lot more people are talking about this and scrutinizing the game. And yes, it is a remake of a less than 10-year-old PS3 game with a PS4 remaster priced at $70. And so if you have a problem with one or two of those things, then you might feel a certain type of way about this game, and that's okay. I mean, I can see where people are coming from about this project in particular. I get it. It would have gone a long way if it was priced at $50 or $40. It would have been seen as much better. Maybe if it came out 5 years later as a late lifecycle PS5 game, perhaps as a 15-year anniversary thing, that would have perhaps landed a lot better in terms of just public perception. But even then, the real sticking point here in the context of this tweet is it's just a cash grab, which is a little bit on the reductive side and just a bit silly when you understand that, like, okay, but Sony's a business, so of course they want to release a product and make money. That much is obvious, but even more so, we've discussed how the origin story of this game is that it wasn't, it almost didn't happen in the first place. It was the Visual Arts Service Group that wanted to make their own game. They decided to prove themselves with an Uncharted remake. They decided to switch to The Last of Us. At some point, Herman Hulst looked at the game and said, it shouldn't cost this much. Let's hand it over to Naughty Dog. They've got a team doing nothing. They want to work on PS5 dev kits. And so allegedly, this team was not going to do anything else. So for the time being, they did this. And that's what we've pieced together so far. There's surely some details that we're missing in between, but that's largely what we've pieced together so far. And, as time presses forward, we're seeing more evidence that that is more or less what happened. It's not necessarily something where Sony greenlit this and said, we need to remake The Last of Us and get this out and shove it down people's throats. And, some folks hear that and they go, okay, I get it. I understand, but I still think it's unnecessary. It didn't need to happen. And more so, let's say you do want it. Let's say you think it looks pretty and you're excited about the gameplay changes and you go, okay, I want it, but why 70? It seems too steep. And, that also goes into the basic premise of, well, you don't have to buy it right away. Games typically go on sale pretty quickly, or, well, I understand there's caveats here. Nintendo first party stays a high price for a while. Sony first party kind of doing the same thing nowadays, but even then, you can go to eBay and find a cheaper copy of Horizon, Ratchet, Returnal, even Gran Turismo for a little bit less of a price or a more affordable price, or a secondhand disc if you can use discs on your PS5. But there's many ways you can approach it as a consumer where you have to decide for yourself what is the price price you're willing to pay. It's always been that way, and it's why I've always disliked the price conversation in general. I've never liked it, especially in games, because there's just such a wide spectrum on games in general that often just does not really fit. I mean, of course, there's the very obvious angle of games have stayed the same price for 20-something years, accounting for inflation. They've never been cheaper, and oftentimes they offer way more value than they did 20 years ago. That's true. It's also true that a lot of game companies nowadays make way more money than they did 20 years ago, so they can afford to offer the same price or less prices. And they don't have to be as predatory with their pricing or as aggressive with their pricing. That is also true. So there's that obvious angle, but ignoring that, what I've never liked about the price conversation, and I know people disagree and they don't like this take, but it's just that there's just the spectrum is too wide on value. If you go to watch a movie based on local ticket prices, it's $10 to $20, maybe $30 if you're in a big downtown city or whatever. But you know what you're getting. $10 to $30, an hour and a half to 2.5 hour movie. You pay $20, you might get an album with 10 to 20 songs. You can pay $15 for a streaming service, and you know you're going to get access to a bunch of movies and TV shows of varying quality. There's just certain things in life when it comes to what you expect to pay and what you expect to get in return, and games just don't fit that at all, because you can spend $10 and get a 20-hour game. You can do a free-to-play game and it's 1,000 hours long, and you can spend no money and be free to play. You could drop tens of thousands in it and get no value out of it. You can do a $50 game and spend 100 hours with it. There's just such a wide spectrum, and that's also ignoring the fact that every person has a different financial situation. I've never found comparables to be useful, especially when games drop in price. There's just way too many variables that I've never liked. So I always prefer to just talk about a game's quality as is and leave the pricing to the individual and how they feel about the game in particular. That's just how I've always felt about it. I still feel that way today, and I feel that way about this game in particular. If you don't want to spend the $70, don't do it. Wait, and when it gets to a price you want to pay, that's where you bite the bullet. It's the classic The Order 1886 story of the game got a lot of criticism for its short play time at $60. But then the game had this weird resurgence 4 or 5 years later, where all I saw were good things about the Order on, online, on comment threads, whatever. And sure, that's all anecdotal. There's nothing scientific about that. But, by the time people were able to buy the game for $5 or next to nothing, and they realized they had such a great time with it, there's a perception thing that happens for people. And it's just the same thing. So I've never liked the price discussion, but, all around, I see where people are coming from with this game. I don't think there's any right answer. The only right answer is what you decide in your head. Moving on to our next news story, Jade Raymond's Haven Studios, the recently acquired PlayStation studio, where that acquisition has closed and confirmed by Sony on Twitter. And they don't normally announce acquisition closures, as in the deal is done and it's official, but they did this time, probably because it was also in conjunction with an interview with Jade Raymond on GamesIndustry.biz, where we learned a lot more about what's going on at Haven Studios. So let's talk about what we learned. Right now, Haven has 106 employees, basically doubling since we last heard from them back in October. And most notably, they've made a significant investment into R&D and the cloud, because Haven was formed during the pandemic and it was all primarily remote work. And it looks like they're capitalizing on this further. So Jade Raymond says, and I quote here, "We had a cloud team initially that was about 6 people working on new ways to work. Now, we've just welcomed another 21 engineers to focus on long-term cloud innovation, because we really believe it's going to be a game changer in terms of how games are made." She continues in the interview explaining that this new approach is starting to reach other PlayStation studios, where Haven's COT is speaking with these teams about their technical and cloud perspective workflows. The PS4 and PS5 system architect Mark Cerny is also involved too. Jade says, and I quote, "It's not just tied to cloud, but also some more forward-thinking R&D. I'm not able to say too much now, but that's obviously one of the other things that's been a big attractor and is exciting our team with PlayStation. Of course, Mark Cerny is kind of like a rock star too, so being able to collaborate with him is really exciting." She also talks about the studio having a flat structure instead of a more corporate one, and how they're keeping the hybrid setup, letting people work remotely and not pressuring them of coming back into the office. This might really put into perspective why Sony was so interested in securing Haven well before they, released a game and kind of showed what they're capable of, when it seems like a good part of what they're doing behind the scenes is changing the actual workflow of how games are made in the first place. And that is a very important part of Haven, is that they were made during the pandemic. So right off the bat, they were doing remote workflows. They have a temporary office right now, so they still don't really have a true home per se, but they're embracing the hybrid workflow, and they're bringing in a ton of people just doing R&D and looking into new ways to go about making games, and sharing builds, and trying to avoid some of the pitfalls and normalities that goes with game development, which there tends to be a lot of bottlenecks in that process. So it looks like that's what they're looking to break through right now, which they might be making some very good progress based on Mark Cerny getting involved, and also, again, Sony deciding to tie the knot on a developer that, again, has not put out any sort of project just yet, which at the time I speculated, okay, maybe the progress is really, really good, but also perhaps Sony wants to get them on the cheap while they, before they put out a project and have way more bargaining power there, right? Which should go without saying, but it seems like there's a lot of really exciting things going on at Haven just beyond their live service game, even if you don't care about that. The collaboration aspect with PlayStation Studios is a big part of why they're so successful, and it just goes more into the DNA of how Sony, goes about this. They look for talent, they look for technologies and collaboration, and looks like they're getting a lot of that out of Haven already. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was the Cuphead Delicious Last Course DLC, so a lot of you were asking about if I would do that because I did the full platinum run before, and a lot of you really enjoyed that, so yes, I had to retain my 100% completion for trophies, so you can go check out my run there, and as always, another video on Tuesday. But until then, that is it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.